There's a question I get just about every week. I get a lot of questions every week, and this is one. This is a visual for the people who are watching the podcast today. Which doe should I shoot? Okay, if you're listening to this, I'm holding up a picture of 15 antlerless deer running through a field. If that's your property, you probably don't need to ask that question because we're going to get to it. That's deer management, and that's necessary management. But today's podcast is going to be about which doe should I shoot. So welcome. Thank you for joining us. My name is Dan Schmidt with Deer and Deer Hunting. I think I sound like a broken record, but I want to thank you for joining us on this podcast, wherever you're listening to it and wherever you're watching it. Please just be sure to like, share, subscribe, and please comment, because we actually get these ideas from you guys and gals that are asking the questions, and that's where we got these. Actually, this question came from Ian, because Ian, he's been a kind of a doe hunting fool here over the past 2 years.
Definitely a fool.
And killing some nice ones, I might add.
Yeah, one nice one, and let's just say we had a few misses.
A couple misses, but you're learning and really getting some experience in this.
I'm looking at a lot of does, that's for sure, and I'm enjoying it.
And you're becoming very good at aging them, which is a difficult thing to do, no matter how much experience you have.
Oh, I know all about that. We post a short on our YouTube channel, and people, come in there. The keyboard warriors come in there, and they age them like crazy. They think they know. Oh, that's 4 years old. No, that's
on a doe.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that to be mean, but it is really hard to age does. I mean, yearlings, fawns, even 2-year-olds. Yearlings and fawns pretty easy. Beyond that, difficult depending upon where you live. In the South, it's a little bit easier on some of them. But those deer, when they mature, I'm talking about Alabama, Mississippi, I've hunted Florida, Texas. Some of those does you don't know. I mean, those big old nannies where they get true matriarchs or seniors, and I'm going to get to that. Different story. Up here in the upper Midwest, in the North, difficult, especially in places like Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, New York, Pennsylvania. When you get mature does, Illinois, just these big, we call them cement blockhead does, very hard to age them. And I would recommend, I don't think you're really going to, I haven't done it in 30 years. I've shot hundreds of does over the years with my bow, with my crossbow, with my rifle, shotgun. You really don't get a good feel for the age unless you tooth age them. That's really the only way you can do it. But I should take that back, because I know there's some hunters that are Deer Talk Now fans who do extreme management, and you can age those deer. You can actually put them in those classes, and they fall into 7 classes that I'm going to explain. And you can do that through observation. And that's where your scouting and your basically just being on the land all the time helps. And I'm going to get to that. So that's an interesting thing. So Charlie Alsheimer taught me this. He taught all of us this on buck hunting. And when the first things I say when somebody asks me the question, which doe should I shoot? It goes to Charlie termed this the percentage principle. So he started off by saying, when you're hunting bucks, what is a realistic expectation if you're practicing QDM? And Charlie would always say, well, if you really want to get into deep in the weeds, target your upper 15% of your bucks, which meaning is that could be a 2-year-old, it could be a 3-year-old, or you might be one of the lucky ones where you can hunt 4, 5, 6-year-old bucks. And I suggest that on does as well. So, but it has 2 things here. When you're talking about the percentage principle on hunting does, it would be, number 1, how much land do you have? That's number 1. And number 2, how many deer do you have? And how are they spread out across those age classes? I'm going to get to that here. So first, understand the dynamics of the whitetail doe population. It is complicated. We have plenty of resources here at Deer and Deer Hunting. A lot of it's online. You can find that, or you could pick up John Ozoga's tremendous book, which is out of print, but I know you can find it on Amazon and places like that, called Whitetail Intrigue. He explains it to a T. But you have to understand the female society in whitetail does, that it is very complicated. It's much different than bucks. And I'm going to keep this in a nutshell because there's a lot of other stuff I want to get to answer the question, which doe should I shoot? But the whitetail doe lives in maternally linked groups across the landscape. And if the landscape was this piece of paper, for all of you who are listening, it's just going to be a bunch of interconnected circles across that landscape. That's basically going to look like a spider web. And in those concentrically linked circles, you're going to have doe groups. And how that works is you're going to have seniors, you're going to have matriarchs, then you're going to have the bulk of that herd, which we're talking about dispersers, we're talking about yearlings, we're talking about first-time mothers, second-time mothers, and fawns. There's 7 different groups. When you understand the dynamics of a doe herd, it's really, it will click like, see if I can get that in the microphone. It'll click like that. Once you understand how they live there, you're going to understand how your property is affected and how your hunting will be predicated on whether you shoot does or whether you not shoot does and how many you shoot. So that's the first thing. Okay, it sounds complicated. Now, on the other hand, on the other side of my mouth, I'm going to say, don't outthink yourself. So I'm telling you 2 different things there. The thing you need to do is if you're trying to manage does, and I'm stealing this from Steve Bartilla, actually a lot of this from Steve Bartilla, because he's helped me understand it better than anyone from a hunting perspective. Adopt a rigidly flexible approach to your doe hunting. So it isn't all or nothing. You might go into a season with a plan and then understand some of those dynamics a little bit more and change. Nothing wrong with that. Sometimes it'll set you back. I've had that happen to me. You go in there with a plan like we're going to kill X amount of does, and you do it and you come out of there like we killed too many. Or you go in there and you don't kill enough. I normally don't have that problem. Normally I've been, if you know me, for the past 25 years, we've been preaching from the mountaintops, kill the does, kill the does, kill the does. That time has stopped for most part. I know, and we've heard from people last week that watched the other or listened to the other podcast, doesn't apply to them. They might still live in a part of the United States, which is really hard to find these days, where you do have super high deer densities. And it doesn't seem like you can do anything to put a dent into it. If that's you, then pitch some of this stuff that I'm telling you because you know it doesn't apply, but also understand that dynamic part. And I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into that. But the dynamics are what really make this fascinating and what really helps educate you when it comes to deer management. Okay, so all things being equal, I don't know how big the property you have is. And the other thing connected with that, it doesn't, unless you have thousands of acres, the bird's eye view is what matters. Do you have a deer factory in your general area? And what I mean by a deer factory is there enough cover and habitat to support a large number of deer? So I don't know your property. You have 40 acres, you have 100 acres, you have 400 acres, you have 4,000 acres. What is around you? And how is that being managed? So all intents and purposes, let's just say you have 80 acres. You're not raising deer on 80 acres. Get that out of your head right now. You are not raising deer. You're not raising enough deer on 80 acres to make a difference for that area. For that square mile, it's not happening. You might be seeing a lot of deer, but at the end of the day, your efforts are basically to improve that 80 acres for better hunting. That's the first thing you need to understand. And the other thing you need to understand is, from that bird's eye view, what is the story on those neighboring properties? Kind of mentioned that. What's the habitat like? Food, cover, water. How much food, how much cover, how much water. You might have the only woods, and we see this in Indiana and Illinois and Kansas and Missouri. You have a nice stretch of woods, but if you take that bird's eye view from the square mile or two around you, there's not much. It might be all ag. So then you have to understand that you're the lucky one, and that microcosm of all those deer, that picture I showed at the beginning of this, 15 deer running across a field, they're probably spending a disproportionate amount of time on your land. So that needs to come into play when you're thinking about how to manage things. Because if you take those out of the equation, now there's not that factory isn't around you. It's not producing more widgets to come back into those empty shelves. Play along with me here. And then that's when you see, especially today, I see it and hear from people all across the country, I'm not seeing deer, I'm not seeing deer, I'm not seeing deer. That is why. Because this free-for-all of doe hunting has started to make a huge impact on the overall populations. Deer Talk Now is brought to you by Mossberg. Mossberg has been supplying American hunters with quality firearms for over 100 years. Over the years, they've upheld their commitment to innovation by creating a handful of firearms that have shaped the way we hunt today. For more information, visit mossberg.com. Number one thing about which doe should I shoot, this is going to be a broad brush, again, not for everybody. If you have a family group of does, that's the 4 to 6 to 8 does you always see in the same group, leave them alone. If they are living on your property, leave them alone. If those does are the ones you're only getting night photos of, chances are they're in your food plot, but it's at 10 o'clock at night and that's the only time you see them. Chances are they're living on the neighbors. Now that is probably the group that I'm going to target if I'm out to doe hunt. And that you hear Steve talk about that all the time. He calls them fence jumpers. Now he's managing 4,000 acre property in one state and several thousand acre property in another state. Those fence jumpers really affect you guys that have big properties that you're managing, because they're basically coming in, eating your groceries at night, and then leaving. And guess what? During the rut, where are the bucks? They're not on your property, they're on the neighbor's property. So in that case, if that's you, which doe should I shoot? I would be targeting matriarchs out of that group. Why am I targeting matriarchs? Those are the ones that are the most productive. Those are the ones that are most influential on the herd. They're the ones that are teaching those younger deer that guy that I busted up in that tree stand, we're not going near that tree stand during daylight. And well, guess what? He's only on 40 acres. And that's why you think basically the apocalypse happened and you're not seeing any deer. When those deer populations come down, that behavior becomes extrapolated even more in the fact that you're not seeing deer. There might be deer on the landscape, a lot fewer than there were a few years ago, but now the ones that are out there are smart and they're starting to avoid that low rent. Not saying your property is garbage. I'm just saying it's low rent compared to the neighbors if he's keeping them on his land and they're eating on yours just because they can at night. Okay. Like I said, if the deer are not spending a good proportion of daytime activity on your property, that's the doe you want to shoot. They're the ones that are working hardest against your goals of better hunting. Matriarchs are not bad to shoot if you need to target a bunch of does. But like I said, if she busts you, everyone, and not just her fawns and maybe her yearling from last year, other deer, bucks, young bucks especially, you get yearling bucks, they're still hanging out with mom for a little while before they disperse. They become really, their education, that takes a sharp learning curve if that matriarch is there to teach them. Again, okay, out of both sides of my mouth here, that's one part of it. The other part of it, if she's living on my property, not killing her. Don't kill her. Don't kill the matriarch. The matriarch is that big mama doe. She's the one, she's got the eyes and the ears and she's always alert. She might be blowing. But if she's living on my property, leave her alone. Your buck hunting prospects are going to be way better during the rut. So what's the best one to take normally? All things being equal. This has changed. So if you would have read this book, my Whitetail Wisdom book from 22 years ago, it would have been the matriarchs. The matriarchs are those 4 to 10-year-old does. Where in America can you find that anymore? I mean, I know there's places. A lot of my friends in the hunting industry have awesome properties. Just was on one in Louisiana. They have these big doe groups, big mature does. A lot of places, Iowa, Illinois. You go down there, you see these big mamas that they're matriarchs. Normally that would be the best, but what I've seen lately in these areas that have just been hammered, giving out doe tags like they're candy. Now you're looking at the 1.5-year-old does, the yearlings, and the 2.5-year-old does. Because let's face it, those are the heavy lifters for the population right now. So if you're looking for management to keep populations from exploding even more, those are the ones you want to target. And you've heard me talk about it a lot. Doe fawns is a great choice for filling a doe tag. In those cases, not as much as a yearling or a 2.5, because that doe fawn's not adding anything to the population for another year, at least, minimum. Possibly more likely 2. Or if you simply want meat and you can afford to take a couple does, you don't have a lot of deer, that's a balancing act. But a doe fawn obviously is better than shooting a buck fawn, right? It's obviously better than shooting a yearling buck or a 2.5-year-old buck if you're managing for older bucks. And it's much better than shooting that matriarch that's living on your property. It's basically just a surplus deer. So that is something that to keep in mind. I know a lot of people get all upset about hunting doe fawns. You really shouldn't. If you have that opportunity, and let's say you've decided I'm going to kill 1 or 2 deer this year, and you have that many deer, I know a guy who's managed lots of hunting properties. He'll shoot 2 doe fawns every year, and basically that surplus is taken off. The other fawns that have survived are buck fawns, and you got more bucks to hunt in the years to come. So let's talk about the smaller properties for a second. 40 to 80 acres. Let's just say 40 to 100 acres. Can you make 40 acres hunt like 4,000? No. Could you make 40 or 80 acres hunt like 400? Yeah. Yeah, you can. How can you do that? And when I say, what do you mean by that? Well, how can I make 40 or 80 acres hunt like 400? I could have success and kill a nice buck. And when I say a nice buck, a 3-year-old, in most places, that's a nice buck. I know guys are all geeky about this stuff these days, and they love 4 and 5 and 6-year-old bucks. I'm talking about your average guy who wants to kill a nice, respectable 120-ish, 130-ish inch deer. You can make that smaller property hunt like a bigger property if you take a smart approach. The smart approach is limited doe hunting if you don't have the deer population. Limited is like 1, possibly 2 a year. If you're overrun with deer, some people still are, maybe more than that. But once you start taking more than that, when I say it's going to hunt like 400, it's not going to, because you're fracturing the social structure of the female society, which is, we talk about it. It's complex, but it's understandable how they're going to use that property. And also, you're just putting too much pressure on that land. But you definitely can go in there, selectively take out a couple does, save that matriarch, low impact approach, and have fabulous buck hunting during the rest of the year, especially during the rut, October, November, late season, December, if you have good food sources. What about 4,000 acres? Or I should say, could you make 400 hunt like 4,000? No. It's hard. It's really hard. What about 4,000? What can you do on 4,000? Could you possibly screw that up? I talked to Steve about this, and he said, honestly, A couple guys who are just gung-ho doe killers like Ian and myself would have a heck of a time ruining 4,000 acres. It would be really hard, especially if it was a good mix of woods and food, egg or food plots, things like that. So the is it a conundrum? The thing about that is people with large properties by the thousands of acres, I don't say this to mean any disrespect, you just don't, it's almost non-existent for you to make a mistake, to mess up a deer population. If you've done that, I'd like to hear from you. If you own or have basically sole rights on 2,000 to 4,000 acres, and you have overhunted that so much that it's affected your deer population, I would love to hear from you. But can a guy with 40 or 80 acres make a mistake? Yes, absolutely. I've done it myself. Gone out there blindly, just listened to the state. Here's all your free doe tags. Have a good time. And just killed does till my ears bled. You know, I mean, it's like, had fun. Nothing wrong with that. But then a year or two or even 3 years down the road, we don't have any deer around anymore. And I'm seeing that so much these days from people from all over the place. They're getting very disappointed because it's just, has to be putting a foot on a brake right now in a lot of these places. Okay, so I talked about how the deer live on the landscape. What I wanted to just kind of conclude this with was a little bit of explanation on those classes. There's 7 social classes in the female whitetail herd, 7 of them. And this isn't anybody just making this up. This has been vetted through scientific, peer-reviewed research. John Ozolga basically led this in Michigan. A deer researcher for 30 years. John basically studied how these deer live on the landscape. And that's how, and it wasn't just John. It was Lou Verm, and there was other people there. But this has also been, similar studies have been done not just up in Michigan, but in Alabama and Georgia and Mississippi and other states. So you have basically we call Northwoods. You'd have Midwest, Northeast, Southeast, Southwest. And it basically jives with every environment. How the population levels are is obviously different. And the terrain obviously makes a difference in how you see that unravel in front of you. It's a little bit easier when you have the distinct seasons of spring, summer, winter. Because in winter, in a lot of places, in the far north, the deer yard. And then you're going to see that where you've got we see it now in January and February and March in snow country. You're going to see in a feedlot or a pick cornfield that maybe a farmer didn't get all it off. You're going to see 50, 60, 100 deer in that field. Are those deer there in spring and summer? No. Those are all those social groups coming together. Okay, so that's part of it. And the other part of it is I talked about all this heavy harvesting of doe populations. It has fractured those age structures. So it used to be back in the turn of the century, you would have those senior does, 12 years old and older, matriarch does, I should say 11 years old and older, matriarch does 4 to 10 years old, and then those other social classes underneath that. Evenly distributed, just about. Today, in a lot of places with this unregulated doe hunting, you basically have, you can't call them seniors, but the seniors essentially would be 2 and 3 year old does. They're not. So basically, you've taken 7 social classes, probably broken it down to maybe 4, if you're lucky, maybe 3 if you're lucky. And that wreaks havoc on how these deer use the property. How does it affect you individually? If you have a smaller property, it's going to be much tougher for you to hunt and see deer throughout the season. If you have a larger property, obviously, they're going to be attracted to your property because you have probably better food. You definitely probably got better cover, and you probably have water if you've got more land than your neighbors. Not always, but for all intents and purposes, probably. So we're going to look at those classes. The first class are fawns. The second class are yearlings, purely based off the age. So 18-month-old deer, coming up on 18 months, yearling. The third class is first-time mothers, which is interesting because they call that its own class because a yearling might not have fawns, but if it does have fawns, it falls into its own social class. But it could be a yearling or it could be a 2-year-old. Then you have the dispersers, which are normally second-time mothers. And that's the key that you have to listen to. That second-time mother. And now this is going to click when I talk about those fractured social structures with the females. Those dispersers normally are 2.5-year-old does. They could be 3.5-year-old does. But the interesting thing with the dispersing class of the white-tailed doe is they are moving a 1/4 mile approximately from that original home range. The original major range that they've had. It's not a far distance, but now think about it from your property perspective. How far is a 1/4 mile? It could be a long way from your 10 acres, right? And now you have a lot fewer deer at much younger age structures. Those dispersers are not living on your property. So now you got to think about, what am I going to do when I want to shoot a doe? I'm going to get to that in a minute. The 4th through 6th levels of social classes, number 3, there's actually 3 levels in that 4 to 6. Between 4 and 10 years old, you have 3 levels of matriarchs. So, it's almost like how many years of experience you have in the NFL. You're a veteran at 4 years, but you're also a veteran at 8 years. And if you're a good player, it's kind of that with deer. Between 4 and 10 years old, those matriarchs, they are the ones who are the heavy lifters for building a population. And that's how we did it across the country. When these states had very few deer and they were trying to build those populations, they populated that with 4 to 10-year-old. Well, they probably didn't catch 10-year-olds, but that matriarch level, that 6-year gap, is what those were the producers. They're just cranking out lots of deer. And then seniors, which is the 7th social class for white-tailed does, are does that are considered 12 years old and older. Please call me if you come across one of those. I've seen 2 in my life. I've actually shot 2 in my life. The only reason we found out was from tooth analysis. Those are, and a lot of times you don't even know it. You kill this doe. Yeah, it's a nice doe. You look at its teeth and it's worn all the way down to the gum line. You're probably not going to run across it. I'd say most people who would find those would be hunters in the north and hunters in Texas. There's a lot of places where they just can't keep up with doe populations, and some of those does live to be ancient. That's places I've seen them the most. If you've seen them in your places, please let me know. But the matriarchs, which this was more applicable 20 years ago, but matriarchs that are 4 to 10 years old, if your mission is to kill deer to reduce the population, if you're killing a matriarch, you are providing the greatest service to deer management, because those are the deer that help knock that population down. What about today? Go back to where I first started talking. When are you killing a matriarch? For me, on just about every property that I hunt, I'm killing that matriarch if I know she's living on the neighbors. If she's like what Steve calls, if she's a fence jumper. I'm killing that doe because that will actually cause a little disruption. And then hopefully there's going to be, somebody's going to take her place. and then hopefully somebody's going to be wandering over onto my property and setting up home there, or maybe bringing some other animals with them. That's what you have to keep in mind. You have to keep in mind that with every action, there's a consequence. So if you're shooting a doe, you might just say, hey, I shot a doe. In the grand scheme of the natural world, that is going to cause a difference on how they live on the landscape. So I hope that helps. I know I kind of get geeky on some of this stuff. It's because it's what I love to do. But if you have any questions, wherever you're listening to this podcast, just jot us down a comment. Send them to us on Facebook, on the Deer and Deer Hunting Facebook page. Just type in a comment saying, hey, I got a question for the Deer Talk Now guys, or, I want to follow up on this podcast. Again, the Deer Talk Now podcast, we've been doing this podcast since 2012, which just blows my mind. We're entering our...
It's 2011.
2011, Mike, you corrected me. Thank you. 2011. So how many years is it? 13 years. And you can catch new episodes every Thursday. And Ian makes sure that these are disseminated everywhere. So people say, where can I watch it? You can watch it on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram.
Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Facebook is another great place.
All the podcast platforms have it, just about.
Yep.
That I've looked at.
Yep.
Podbean is one that I've been using.
iHeartRadio's
got it.
Yeah.
So
14 platforms.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you all for listening and watching. I am Dan Schmidt. Until next Thursday, we will catch you again for another episode of Deer Talk Now.